Thanks to each of you that have joined us today. Welcome to the KVEC New and Emerging Teacher Cadre for this month, January 12th, 2022. So this is our first one of the new year, and we'd like to welcome you back and hope that you're having a successful school year. I know that we've been out some and just getting back in session, but we're glad that you're here with us and that you're able to join. So today, our main topic is going to be talking about specially designed instruction. So the very first thing that we're going to give you an opportunity to do for this session is to tell us what your definition is of specially designed instruction. Think about how do you define specially designed instruction? What does that mean to you? Because that's one of those acronyms in special education we use all the time, but to really understand and think about it is going to be our focus for today. But take 1 minute and think about how you would define specially designed instruction. Okay, so that's our 1 minute timer. So we're going to stop right there, and let's talk just a little bit about what we define specially designed instruction. We see that it's instruction designed to meet students' individualized learning goals. That's great, Candace. That's exactly it. Caitlin says what the teacher does. That's right. Tracy says it's instruction that's geared towards certain student or a certain group of students, depending on that student's need. And then we have individualized, right? So we know that it is individualized. It's our specially designed instruction that is individualized. It's an adaptation to appropriate needs of the student. Yes, thank you, Christy. Instructions directed towards specific students, instruction based on the needs of students, instruction that's adapted to a particular student's needs. So we'll kind of proceed with that, but those are all correct things. It's what we're thinking about that we make it special for that individual student to give them access. So let's look at a more formalized definition of specially designed instruction. So, and I'm just going to give you just a second to read that. We say that specially designed instruction is how we adapt it as it is appropriate. So how do we adapt the content? How do we adapt our method, or how we deliver instruction? So those are all things that we do that makes it specially designed instruction, or SDI. And the other piece of that is, how do we make sure that we meet that need of the child that has that disability, so we give them access to the general curriculum? So those are all the important parts of the specially designed instruction. And so we have Chastity and Doug that are here with us from the last time, and we kind of talked about the progression of how we think through this IEP process. And we thought about, we've moved through present levels, we've talked about goal development, we've talked about in the content areas, and then we did some goal writing. Now let's talk about how we select what that specially designed instruction is that's aligned to that goal. So that's really what our focus is going to be today. We just wanted to make sure that we understood and had that definition of what specially designed instruction is, and how we can focus on that for today. And this one is just a little more clear definition, because when we talk about the methodology or the method that we deliver instruction, that's how we can make that special, the method that we choose for students. And so I won't read all of it, but I want to just hit the highlights. It's the decisions, the instructional decisions we make, the approach that we use, the procedures that we use, or the routines that we use to help accelerate or enhance learning according to the goal of instruction. So that's the other thing, is we have to make sure that as we're planning for specially designed instruction, what we're doing special for that student, what adaptations do we need to make, or what instructional choices do we need to make, so that we're connecting the delivery of instruction to that student's goal and the individual need of that student. And so we can think about, sometimes in special education, it requires us to think outside of the box, the way we normally deliver content or what we expect students to demonstrate their performance. So as we think about specially designed instruction, we can think about how that could look differently, and how that way we can make sure we meet the needs of those students. And we have to be real flexible with it. So the thing we have to think about is, when we talk about the specially designed instruction, or SDI, we don't use the same SDI for every single student. just because they have a reading goal or because they have a writing goal or because they have a math goal. We choose the specially designed instruction based on the need of that student and then what that goal says. And so that's what kind of defines or separates the way we can think about that specially designed instruction. So it's not the same for everyone, but it really is varied. So the next bulleted item on this slide just talks about the content and skills that we're using different structures. We might use adaptive materials, we might use modeling. With our special ed students, we probably need much more modeling, much more guided practice, much more independent practice. But with independent practice, we're talking about giving them an opportunity to practice, but then giving them an immediate feedback on that. So as we think through how we can do that, how can we increase the opportunity to allow students to see that delivery of instruction model? How can we give them more opportunities to practice? And then if we give them chances to practice, how then can we give them really quick feedback to know if they're getting it or not and to support their learning? The other thing is that our instruction should be around those characteristics of highly effective teaching and learning. And so that's what we know. There are best practices in effective teaching and learning. And you'll see once you access this, you'll have access to all the links that are in this PowerPoint presentation, and these will be on the holler for you. So any of these that you want to go back and look at, they're all hyperlinked and accessible for you. But we have to think about what is effective teaching and learning. What do we know are the most effective strategies, and how can we choose the strategies that we use with our students from those evidence-based practices that we know are effective. And so that's part of that, figuring out what SDI is. But the next bulleted item says it's what the teacher does. And I know that someone put that in the chat. I think maybe Caitlin dropped that in the chat. It's what the teacher does. It's what the teacher does to instruct, to assess. What do we do to reteach the student? What do we do to help them to be able to make progress in the general curriculum? If we have to teach them, then we have to think about what resources and materials we would use. How are we going to deliver that? How can we plan for them to have lots of opportunities for extra practice? And how are we going to give them feedback? How are we going to let them know how they're doing so that they're not making the same errors over and over without us jumping in there and intervening? So this is a great slide, and I'm just going to put this on the screen and give you another like 30 seconds to look at this. But this one is developed by the Kentucky Department of Education that really gives us an idea about what specially designed instruction is. One of the things I like the most about this particular slide is if you'll look at the graphic on the bottom, and we see on the left-hand side, we see that, that's equal, that everybody has the same size steps. What is that, a step, right, that puts them on a level playing form. But if we look at the one on the right, let's talk about equity, and we talk about what is equitable and accessible for kids. So just because it's equal doesn't always mean that it's equitable. And so that's what we have to think about for our students with disabilities. What are those pieces of instruction that they need to give them that platform where they can perform with the other kids that are their same age with access to that general curriculum? So that's how we kind of think about that as we move forward. But, so if you look on the screen, also it talks about adapting. What changes can we make to help to meet the student's needs, right? So how do we make that individual so we can adapt it per student, right? So if we're giving them an assignment, maybe not every student needs the same adaptation. Maybe we don't give every student 2 choices. Maybe not all students need that same adaptation. So we really think through what's appropriate for that kid. And then some students, as we think about it, and this connects back to when we know the present levels. We know in the present level, we recognize those academic and functional strengths that students have. So based on that strength, we have to think about then our instruction. How do we support them using what they're pretty good at? And then how can we continue to support that? And the same thing with content. We really look at those Kentucky academic standards and think about what is it supposed to be that a student should be able to do at that grade level. And then we kind of think backward about, well, do they have this skill at this grade level? Do they have this skill at the grade level before, And so that's how we can make some of those adaptations. We look at that content and we kind of backward design our plan for how we're going to teach students. And then that can accelerate them, right? So sometimes we kind of have to back up and figure out what those skills are that they need, and then move, and then that helps them to accelerate. And the other thing is the method. What methods are we using? And so like high leverage practices, for example, if we use high leverage practices, that means that we choose those high leverage. We know that those are strategies in those areas, in the content areas, that are proven to be effective, that we know there's tons of research on. If you look at that second one, it's Hattie's high yield effect size. We know that some strategies have a greater impact on student learning than other strategies. So if we know what those are, then we can use those strategies with our students, and we hope that that would accelerate their learning more as well. And we always want to think about those evidence-based practices, and not just using things that we like to teach, or some strategies that we've found that we've enjoyed to use in the classroom before, but we want to make sure that those strategies are specific, and we know that those are the ones that have proven to be effective. So just to think about that, those are those three big pieces about, how we're going to improve those outcomes for students with disabilities. So that's how we're going to adapt that content and the methodology. And then let's think about how we're going to deliver it. So we're going to change, we're going to look at those strategies we know are real effective, and then how we're going to give that information to students. And that means we want to increase the engagement of students. And what we mean about that is we need to have our students with disabilities having many, many more opportunities to respond, right? Because they need much more practice than some of the other kids in the classroom. And lots of times our kids, they get the least amount of practice because maybe they don't know the answer, or they're afraid to say the answer, or they don't want to feel like they are unsuccessful in the class. So a lot of times they'll pull back and maybe not engage in learning, or not be part of discussions, or are kind of isolated from that. So if we think of ways that we can get our kids involved, and different ways to have them respond to answers to questions, for them to demonstrate their learning, then that gives us a better opportunity to really know what they can do. If it's a barrier for reading, for example, and they're doing really well in social studies, how can they demonstrate what they know in social studies, even if they have that barrier in reading? And so that's the good thing about specially designed instruction. It allows you to kind of think outside of the way we traditionally do that. Not everything always, every time would have to be, a multiple choice test, but how can we also give them an opportunity to build a model, or do a visual presentation, or could they do a slide presentation? How can we allow them to demonstrate what they know that's a little different than the way we've done it before, so we can measure what they do know rather than than to focus on what their deficit is. And so those are kind of just some big pieces about specially designed instruction that I wanted to talk about. This I love is a graphic, and it kind of tells us, where does specially designed instruction fit at? Where do we fit it in? And we see here on this one, we have to make adaptations. We have to modify the content, the method, or delivery to make sure that we're meeting that individual need of that student. And I think maybe it was Dean Paul that told me the other day, one of the things that he'd read recently in that John O'Connor book, because he talks about what good specially designed instruction is that if you had to answer the question, what are you doing that's special? If you're answering this question to a parent, what are you doing for my child that's special, that's different than what every other kid's getting? How do we answer that question? And so then that's how we move into those. We have to think about, we're choosing high leverage practices, we're using a really explicit instructional approach, and we're giving them intensive instruction. So we base those strategies on that model. We know that we choose something that's research-based or evidence-based strategy. We teach it very explicitly, so that we know that there's not room for error, that we're very, very explicit. And we're going to talk about that on through this session. And then that's very intensive, that we give them that focus time to be able to answer and respond, and that we can correct them and give them feedback as we move along through that process of instruction. This slide here is really about, how do we know then what specially designed instruction that we should choose? And so two things that we would really focus on and remember is, one is we choose the specially designed instruction that's related to the goal. So again, that goes back to, we know what the student strengths are in the present levels, we know their area of concern, then we write a goal. And that goal is going to be around that area that we want for them to improve. We have to think about what specially designed instruction we're going to be able to select that makes sense and that's appropriate for students to align with the goal that we have for them. And that all of this SDI shouldn't be the same for every single student. And when you think about like specially designed instruction for reading, you know, there's always paired reading and choral reading and echo reading and all of those same ones that we use over and over and over. But as we're thinking about it, let's really think about the goal and what the student needs in order to be able to achieve that goal. So sometimes when you look at an IEP, it's kind of disconnected. You could have a goal and it might be a comprehension goal, but some of especially the SDI isn't aligned to that same comprehension. Or there may be a fluency goal, but then we're in there and we see paired, echo, and choral reading, or we see direct instruction and comprehension strategies, right? But there's a disconnect. So always, as you're developing that IEP, make sure it makes sense. Look back and say, does that make sense? Does that instruction I selected, does it match what the student needs? And does it connect to the goal that they have? And if you ask yourself that question and you continuously use that IEP to drive what you do every day in your instruction, then it'll make more sense. It'll make more sense for the student. It'll make more sense for you as the teacher. And it really tells you what your next steps are for instruction. So it really helps us and guides us through that process. And so we have the Schoolhouse document, and I know we probably shared that with you all before, but in the Schoolhouse document, it looks like this over here on the bottom right-hand corner of my screen, and it says IEP and Lesson Plan Development Handbook. I know we keep referring back to it all the time when we do these sessions, but it really is something that you would want to have right there in your hand when you're thinking about what specially designed instruction you can choose in the different content areas to support your student. So when you're writing an IEP, it's good to have a copy of this, or at least have an electronic copy on your computer. And you can just use that to kind of help you know what to do in some of those areas. And then you have your IEP guidance document. Then that way we're really connecting what we're doing in the IEP with the instruction we do every day. So it brings back together the whole, are we getting the compliance part and are we getting the teaching and learning piece? So it really puts those two pieces together. And so I'm going to stop right there and I'm going to switch over. And I think Chastity's going to talk a little bit about a reading goal. And then we're going to talk about specially designed instruction and how we select the right SDI based on that goal for a student.
So what we're going to do is talk about the reading, because Dion started out doing just the general SDI, and we're carrying through our goals, because each month when we talk about this, we've taken you through establishing the baseline with your assessments, and then writing your goal, and then implementing that goal into progress monitoring. And now we want to just to have that cohesiveness. We're going to use this goal that we had used last month. So with this one that we had used before, it is a reading fluency goal. And this is copied from the other ones just as a reminder. And we noted the baseline information there that she was reading 105 words, correct words per minute. In our analysis that we had written last month, that we had noted an instructional change based on her progress. She had hit a plateau, and we implemented an instructional change, and what it was decoding, a decoding strategy that could be looking for known words inside of words and chunking. So before I go farther into that, let's talk about what that looks like a little bit, because we talk about, and we throw these terms out of what SDI is and names of it, and we say fluency strategies and decoding strategies, but sometimes we don't really go into explaining what that is exactly. So but the first one, looking for known words inside words, is one I think, if you just looking when they have a bigger word, if you can look in that and you're talking and you can recognize those smaller words that's inside of words, that's what that is. And it's just it's a way you can break it out when throwing back to the syllabification, when you can break those words apart, sometimes in like compound words and things like that, you're going to be able to see words in smaller words inside bigger words, and that will help them recognize those, and then they can apply it and know the bigger words. Chunking is also just the word parts, if they and then blending those word parts together. Like, you could do prefixes and then the suffixes, or the digraphs, things like that, those or even word parts or compound words. When you can separate those and focus on pronouncing each section of that word, and then you can blend that together, then that is a strategy that they can use. Is just you're kind of dissecting words and then putting them back together. So that's what those strategies look like. And when we finished at the end of the analysis, when we talked about it last month, she was trending upward toward meeting her goal. And so we hadn't made any instructional changes. So just for today's sake, we're going to say that she has hit another plateau. And what do we need to do? Because sometimes, as they progress through, they do hit plateaus, and you do need to make those changes for one reason or the other. So, and also, like Dion had mentioned, you want to make sure that your strategies match your goal, because, for example, you don't want like direct instruction or explicit instruction on how to use a graphic organizer for, that would be more of like a reading comprehension goal. So this would, a strategy, the use of a graphic organizer for a fluency goal would not be appropriate. So just want to make sure that would be like a non-example per se of what you would use. So you don't want to use those. So I know sometimes that is the instruction for a graphic organizer is a good strategy, but make sure that it matches the goal that your student has. So ones that would match the fluency would be what we have down here. Some additional strategies would be the word analysis strategies. And this is one of my favorites. It's you use your prefixes and suffixes and compound words. And you, if you know, again, breaking that part into the syllables, if you know what the prefix is, A, that you can say the prefix, and B, you know what the prefix means, then that would help you, A, to pronounce the word, and then also understand the meaning of those words. That will help with the vocabulary, which also goes into helping with that fluency. If you understand those words and know what the vocabulary is, then you could read those more efficiently, and it will increase your reading fluency. And the same with the suffixes. That is one of my favorites, is being able to break those words apart and be able to use those, and the morphology piece of it. The other one, which leads into the pre-teaching of the vocabulary, I think that's another big one. And I chose these because I think sometimes we overlook the importance of vocabulary and pre-teaching those words to those students, especially when they are in regular classes, like in their math and science and social studies classes. They have those vocabulary words for the units, and sometimes they get glossed over, just like a light touch on them, we say. But sometimes our kids need a little bit more in-depth instruction in those vocabulary words. And if we just take just a few minutes to go over those and they truly understand what those words are, it would help them understand those concepts and be able to increase their reading fluency, which ultimately increases their comprehension. Because it doesn't help, if the kid can pronounce the word, if they don't understand what those words mean, then it's not going to help them when they need to know that concept. And then the last couple that I have listed here would be repeated readings and choral readings. Those are two more fluency strategies that you could practice. It's that helps them just practice. And sometimes I've had a couple some teachers ask me, it's like, well, the repeated readings, is it just memorization? It's not really that they're learning it. And part of that is, but just the repetition of seeing those words over and over in print, that just helps them get that automaticity to be able to just, when they see it, they know it, instead of having to apply the decoding strategies to sound out those words. Because eventually you want them to be able to just look at it and read it without, and moving on, just like you learning your multiplication facts. It just increases the speed, and it helps them ultimately with the comprehension, which is the ultimate goal for reading. And then the last one is the choral reading, and that's the one for they can read. You would be the person to lead that, and then you would read it. And what you're doing at the same time is modeling your rate and your tone and an appropriate for and what that's going to sound like. The kids can follow along with you. They say the words that they know, and then eventually, as you go through that, then they can pick up on those words, and that's just an additional strategy that you can use. So all of these that's listed match directly with fluency.
Jess, if I could just interject just for a second, I really like the discussion around vocabulary. I think it's so vital for our students. Just thinking about being a new teacher and learning a new language and all the acronyms that go with special ed, if you make that connection. And then the other thing is, it's very important that we understand how the general intelligence piece speaks to this particular determination of specially designed instruction. So if we know that a student has memory issues, that can really impact comprehension and the ability to learn. And so we need to think through that lens. And then if they have visual spatial relationship issues, how's that going to impact their ability to make sense of what they see and that type of thing, and really applying that general intelligence to that determination, and really looking for some real clues into how they best learn is a big piece of what needs to be included in the present level. Making the connection between what's needed for each individual student. And one key too, I think, that we have to realize is this is not a laundry list. This is not something we just pick and choose from a drop-down box. This is something that we really diagnose, and that we really intentionally look at what the student needs. This is the most important thing we do, really.
I did want to say one more thing, Chas, on that. So like what Chastity did was she looked specifically at the goal that's here for Karen, right? So she was trying to think about presenting Karen with a 5th grade passage. So we're trying to get Karen to be fluent. We want her to read 195 words per minute fluently on a 5th grade passage. So that's why she selected those things like word analysis strategies with prefixes and suffixes and compound words. So she wouldn't select things like understanding consonant vowel consonant patterns, or she wouldn't understand maybe using words and phrases, whatever, but she specifically selected that because we know that that's what Karen needs, right? So that's what, Dean Paul was even saying, as well as it's not just a laundry list, but it really makes sense to me. So if I know if a kid's at 5th grade and they're reading at the 5th grade level, they're probably beyond those foundational skills like, consonant vowel consonant words, but she's really now trying to push forward to knowing what prefixes and suffixes are and figuring out how to attack words. And so that helps us understand that progression of how kids learn to read, right? That goes along with the standards work too, but that helps us to kind of see what's appropriate. So if I would ask myself, did that specially designed instruction make sense for Karen? And and that's what I would ask myself. And so, and right now, I know that she's starting out at 105 words a minute. So again, it's just about really just making sense, going back and asking yourself, does that make sense? And will that make help the kid accelerate that learning?
Okay, and then looking at the writing, we did not have a writing goal for December that we talked about doing the progress monitoring. We just had the reading, math, and behavior last month. But this is a goal that we used earlier when we were establishing baseline and writing goals. And so this one is one about Harry, and he's using writing using conventions with 80% accuracy. Now, writing conventions, what that includes your spelling, your punctuation, and grammar. And so when we're looking at those, we determined that a writing checklist would be the best way to to look at that, which I know we're not talking about methods of measurement, we're talking about SDI, but I just want, since we didn't talk about this one last month, I wanted to just review it just a little bit, just to refresh you. And what we did is those are things that you can have. You can make a teacher made checklist, or you can find like what you're wanting to look for. So if he wrote sentences, then the checklist might say, did he use a capital letter at the beginning of the sentence? Did he, and then you would check that. Did he put the correct punctuation at the end? And then you would check that. And then each thing that you're looking for, he would check that, you would put a check or an X or leave it blank. And then at the end, how many items he wrote correctly in that paragraph, then you could look at your checks and put the number. And that's how you would that's how you would quantify that to get your percentage on the method of measurement. So going back to the SDI, which is what we're talking about today. So the baseline information for Harry is he was using conventions with 60% accuracy, and his goals, we want him to do 80. And so some of the things that you can do with this one, and I know writing is always the more difficult of the two between reading and writing, and it's harder to find things for writing. But with writing, going into strategies for this one, for the conventions, the first one I put for dictation, because when you do that, and dictation is basically you are writing what the kid says. I know that sounds like a scribe, but if you're doing that as an accommodation, then that would be obviously the scribe. But when you're doing it for a teaching with a lesson, you are dictating that. And what that may look like would be, because you're also modeling what that's appropriate writing. So for example, you could have a small group, and you would give them a prompt, to a writing prompt. So as they would tell you what they want you to write, you would write it exactly. So, and then you would start out writing your sentence. I would put it on chart paper and write, with whatever they say. And then I would say, okay, talk it out. You do the think aloud strategy. I'm going to start out my sentence with a capital letter. So, and then you write it, and it's okay. After you write your sentence, then this, I'm going to put a period at the end of this sentence, because this is a sentence that's telling me, it's not asking me a question, it's telling me something. So I'm going to put a period at the end of my sentence. So as you are dictating what they say, you are talking through that and giving them. So at the same time, you're modeling the correct way that those paragraphs should be written, but you're also talking through that. And that think aloud strategy is getting them to think. And then as you go through, then you can, going back to that explicit instruction, then you've modeled the first part, and then you can go through and say, okay, let's do this together. And then with your next, after you write 2 or 3 sentences, you can start and say, okay, before we get started in the next sentence, what's the first thing that we need to do? And then have them talk it through with you. And then they'll say, I need to start with a capital letter. And then if you have some of the vocabulary words or some of your spelling words that's in there, say, how do you spell this word? What's the correct spelling for this word? And things like that. So that's how you can model that process and get through. And then you can have that as an example for them to look at later when they do their own writing. The other strategy would be the explicit instruction, just like that in sentence writing. That one is just one, just very explicit, but it's very structured on exactly, what those grammar rules are, and when do they need to use capital letters, when do they need to, all of those kind of things, and just the repetition for that. And also throwing in that multisensory to those spelling words is with the that multisensory approach to reading and writing goes, it helps with that spelling. And they can use just, the different strategies for that. But those are the multisensory approach to those spelling words. It helps with the spelling.
All right, we'll move to behavior and turn it over to Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Ms. Dion. As Ms. Chastity was saying, we're following through with Karen, and our goal for Karen was when given a task or direction, she'll begin the task within 1 minute as measured by a latency recording form 3 times a week. We looked at her baseline information, and it was evidenced by the latency recording form. Her average starting time was 4 minutes after her instruction was given. So we collected data, and she kind of, like I said, was all over the place. She dropped from 4 minutes to 3 minutes, back up to 2 minutes, or down to 2 minutes, back up to 3 minutes. And then we decided to implement a self-monitoring checklist. And then after implementing the self-monitoring checklist, her on task or time to begin task minutes dropped. So she was making progress. And a self-monitoring checklist is a way that allows the students to systematically reflect on their behaviors and record it. And this increases awareness of their behaviors and the teacher expectations. There's a website, interventioncentral.org, that may be beneficial to you to check out to see what ideals and some suggestions are there. So some additional SDI strategies to address the students' needs that we may look at. There's an explicit instruction on how to respond, such as cueing, such as verbal, nonverbal, visual, pictures, photos, etc. And with these, providing multiple opportunities and ways to respond helps all of our students, not just our special ed students, but helps all students in the classroom with engagement and also with that opportunity to show what they know without being embarrassed, I guess you could say. So what you would want to do, though, you'd want to teach, model, and practice and provide immediate positive corrective feedback to the opportunity or the way that you have your students respond, and make sure that they understand it. So for instance, we could use a thumbs up or thumbs down. We could use a picture or a flip card. Green means yes, red means no, something like that. You could even have some of our students that need those visual supports could point to pictures as well. So just so that you teach the students how to use those response or those opportunities to respond and what you expect from them. So our next SDI that we may look at is making sure that we present material in a logical and sequential manner with explicit cues to shift from one aspect to the next. Since she has difficulty beginning task or getting on task after instruction was given, some additional things that you may think about is maybe you make an outline for writing tasks or homework assignments or multiple step assignments in order to keep her on task. You may also want to give simple written directions. And if you're given oral directions, speak slowly and precisely. You may use graphs or other visual aids and explain out loud what those graphs mean and how to use those. Provide a checklist or a rubric at the beginning of the assignment or at the beginning of class, and then provide details on how the assignment will be graded. Also give an outline of lessons or notes for the students. So just any way that you can break those bigger lessons or bigger assignments down into small manageable steps or chunks would assist in providing Karen with the ability to get on task quicker. And then also we looked at using direct instruction as far as using advanced organizers. Advanced organizers are tools you aid students in understanding new information by connecting what they already know to that information. Advanced organizers uses their existing knowledge that they have to tie into what they're going to learn. And some types of advanced organizers, such as narratives, expository, and skimming, focus more on previewing and organizing new information before it's presented. Some of the ones that we want to focus on are the types of organizers that fall under graphic, KWL, or analogies and metaphors. And a KWL is a graphic organizer or an advanced organizer that lets you know what the student's background knowledge is. So if you've never used one, a KWL is you simply divide a sheet of paper into 3 sections. One is what the student knows. Another is what the student wants to learn or want to know. And then the third, the L, is what did the student learn? And then you could, of course, you're going to do the what they know and what they want to know. And then after they fill those out, you can go over and discuss those in class. And what did you learn from this assignment? Those are just some additional SDI strategies that we could use to address Karen's on time or time to start tasks. And then, of course, now you're not going to use all these strategies at once. You're going to, pick one or two and then implement those and see what kind of, success you have with those. If they work, continue using them. If they don't work, then you want to change that strategy up. So just don't think just because I put that on the IEP, that you're tied to that strategy. Yeah, you may want to start using that strategy, but if it's not working, then of course you're going to change your approach.
Doug, I was going to ask you a question. So I was thinking about, because behavior is a little more difficult to kind of think about that, especially design instruction. And when we're thinking about explicit instruction, for example, the first SDI strategy we chose was explicit instruction on how to respond to cueing. So if Karen's having trouble beginning on task, so would I first teach her maybe how to use a visual cue or a nonverbal cue or a picture? Would that be a way that I could think about beginning to support this student? I mean, you see what I'm saying? So you might not take all of those SDI strategies, but you might choose one of those and try that with her. And would that be able to guide me on what to do with her in the classroom or in the resource room or when I'm supporting that student?
Well, of course, you know what I'm going to say. You got to make sure you've got some type of relationship or some kind of rapport with that student. But if you could use a signal or nonverbal cue, something that doesn't draw attention to Karen or attention to the student that you're working with, so it doesn't make a big scene in your classroom, then of course you'd want to use nonverbal or visual cues. You could probably try something like taping an index card to the desk. That would have the steps that that the student should follow, or the self-monitoring checklist that you develop. Have that taped to the student's desk so she knows I have a pencil, I have my paper, I have my book open, I'm looking at my teacher, I'm following along. So I mean, again, it goes back to what are the needs of the student, and what kind of rapport do you have with that student, and what have I already tried, or what does the student prefer? How do they prefer to be directed to get on task or whatever?
Okay. Let's talk about the same example with Karen. So we're in this particular goal, we're saying that Karen has a 1-digit subtraction problem. So we're saying that when we give her 10, she's going to correctly solve subtraction problems with 80% accuracy. So we know that she's currently able to solve subtraction problems with about 30% accuracy. So if we are going to improve accuracy on, for example, subtraction problems in mathematics, and so if we know that she's having trouble with subtraction overall, what might be a specially designed instruction strategy that I might use? Try to think of one for mathematics that you might use to help her with subtraction. We really think about what that goal is that she's working on, and I'll flip back to that page. We know that she has 1-digit subtraction issues. So part of those things that we're going to do is how are we going to let her, how are we going to teach her? How are we going to teach her or model for her how to solve those problems? So manipulatives are great, blocks are great. Unifix cubes are all kinds of strategies that we can use, but that's what's special for this child. So if we're talking about Karen, that would be what is special for Karen in the area of mathematics. So that's great. I'm going to kind of move just a little more quickly and talk about explicit instruction. And so we've talked about explicit instruction. Chastity talked about it. Doug talked about it. We write that in our IEP goals because we'll say explicit instruction in whatever we're doing. So what explicit instruction is that we are really using this model of I do it, we do it, and you do it. And so that's the teaching practice we use for kids. And that means the I do it part is that modeling. So we as the teacher model that. We can have the students model along with us, but we are giving them that exemplar or that model of what that should look like. And then we give them an opportunity then to work and solve some problems with us, right? So we give them that first, that model of this is me thinking through this process. I know Chastity referred to it a minute ago, just that thinking about how we talk through that process. And let kids hear us talk through that. They need to hear that thinking process that we have. And that's why modeling is so good. So when we think about the specially designed instruction we choose, we think about explicit instruction in that way. What we're saying is we're going to do it and show them exactly how to do it. So there's no, so that they don't make an error or misconception with that. So then we're going to let them practice. So that's the we do it part. So in mathematics, it is critically important, but I know Chastity will argue in reading and writing, it's just critically important that manipulatives, using those tools or those multisensory tools, but that we allow them the opportunity to practice with those manipulatives, right? So we're monitoring, and it's that careful watch that we have as we're watching kids do that together as the we do it part. And then, we may have to do an example and we see that kids are not getting it, and we have to do it again, and we have to do it again, and we have to do it again. And that is that piece that we don't just put these problems out in front of them solving one-digit subtraction problems, but that we model how we do that. So let's say if we're putting Unifix cubes up, and we might put them on our ladybug or on our inner right board on the screen, and we move those models, we let them see that real concrete model of what they're looking at, and we practice along with them. Right then, we see if they're making a mistake or if they're making errors. And if they are, we can correct those immediately. But they have to see those good, solid models. And our students with disabilities need to see that concrete, those models. And that's part of the big piece with the mathematics, is that they have to first be able to see it concrete before they can get to that semi-concrete, then they get to that abstract. And it's the same way for a lot of the strategies that we teach our students. But we give them, then we have to think about what can we give them, like manipulatives, what other instructional tools, like we talked about over here, somebody put in there, the use of a calculator. There might be, that's appropriate. We might have to give them 100s charts. We might have to give them an organizer, a graphic organizer, but we wouldn't just give them any graphic organizer. There's going to be a graphic organizer that's specific for that goal. So if I have a goal for a child teaching them a subtraction, then I'm going to give them a graphic organizer that may help them keep that in, that helps them organize when they subtract. Right? So it's very specific. So it's not just a graphic organizer, but it's a graphic organizer that I explicitly teach them to use for subtraction. So that's kind of how it becomes much more personalized for the student. Other things I think about, remember, we go back to that thinking about when we were talking about specially designed instruction. Is it the way we teach it? Is it how we adapt the content of it, or how we deliver it? Right? All those are the thinking that we do around specially designed instruction. So we follow
Dion, not to interrupt, but thinking about Anita Archer, she talks a lot about memory, cognitive overload or cognitive load. For students with disabilities, they have a real hard time. You have to be careful not to give them too much too quickly, or to give them a worksheet with several things mixed up on it and then just walk away. You have to supervise that practice. And, we talk a lot about practice and feedback being, a key specially designed instruction concept, if you will, or one that's should be on everyone's list. So, if you're chunking work and keeping it kind of even more simple than you think it should be sometimes is very important for students with disabilities. All right, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to derail there.
Oh, no, I'm just going to be respectful of time, so I'm going to kind of move just a little more quickly, but thank you, Dimple. I think that's a good, important point. Here are more of those must-haves when we teach explicitly. It's important that we know the difference between explicit instruction and direct instruction, and knowing the language when we talk about SDI, because we have a lot of acronyms in special ed, and it's hard to keep up with all of those. So sometimes you just have to stop and look it up, research a little bit of it, try to figure out what some of those really mean. And these are just some examples of what you could do with explicit instruction for mathematics. And then this one's just a graphic talking about things that you can give students. This one might be a graphic organizer that you give student in mathematics, so that they can have a concrete representation, a semi-concrete, and then they solve problems abstractly. So this could be an organizer. So this is a particular example of a graphic organizer. And then I'm going to flip on over here and then just talk about, you know, knowing the difference between, you know, math calculation and math reasoning, and what teacher needs to be, what the teacher can do, and then what the student might need, back to that specially designed instruction. Here is the screen with all of our emails, and you all have access to contact us at any time. And if there's any way we can support you, well, feel free to reach out and to contact us, and we're happy to help. Thanks to each of you all.